Up and running, Mary Lou? Yes? Okay, good morning, everyone. It's 8:30, and I shall bring to order our committee of the whole meeting for, what is today, May the 21st? We've got an agenda before us. Are there any additions or deletions to that agenda? All righty. Councillor Christie.
If not, I'll move the agenda as presented.
Okay, we have a motion to move the agenda as presented. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. We have pre-circulated the minutes of the April 16th meeting. The only thing I've noticed is that on the last page, after adjournment, it should be Reeve King instead of my signature being in that spot. Is there any other? Reeve King.
I'd make the motion to accept the minutes from the April 16th Committee of the Whole as amended.
Alrighty, we have a motion to approve the minutes with the amendment. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. All right, so we're off to new business. 2.1, policy review, mailboxes. Welcome, Mr. Conklin. Working for Canada Post now?
Attempting to.
And anytime you're ready.
Kneehill County policies are presented for review every 4 years at minimum. This review by council ensures the policies will remain current and allows for any modifications to be made based on changing legislation and requirements. This review regarding policy 1310 mailboxes, at this time, administration does not recommend any changes to be made to the current policy as previously approved. So our recommendation would be that the committee of the whole recommend to council to approve policy 1310 as presented.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Conklin? Councillor Forbes.
It's more on what do we do with an employee that repeatedly, it was a question that I had gotten. If they're doing their road work and they're hitting the mailbox after mailbox, what are you doing to ensure that that isn't happening with your employees?
Mike, you want to take this one?
Thank you. So through the chair, we do monitor any of these high impact locations to see if there is continual placement issues with the mailboxes. If there is, we try and look at alternative locations for it.
Thank you. Any other discussion? What's the committee's wishes? Okay, go ahead. Commission member, boy, I'm getting really out of touch here. Councillor Cunningham.
Thank you. I'll move that the committee of the whole recommend to council to approve policy 13-10 as presented.
All right, thank you very much. We have a motion before us to move the policy without changes as presented. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Okay, moving on to the next one, 2.2, gravel stockpile leases. Welcome back, Mr. Conklin.
Sorry. Kneehill County currently leases 2 stockpile sites. During the winter months, Kneehill County currently stockpiles between 10 and 15,000 tons of gravel at both these sites. This reduces our haul time in the summer, allowing for a more efficient re-graveling program. So attached is the current policy 1367. So the changes that we have recommended are the rate will no longer be within the policy itself. It'll be sent out in the master rates bylaw at $600 per acre. And details of removal and cancellation of the lease are set out within the policy where previously they were set out within the lease agreement. Our recommendation would be that council, or that committee of the whole, recommend to council to approve the revisions of to policy 13.6.7 and direct administration to add the gravel stockpile lease rates to the master bylaw at its next normal update.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Conklin? Councillor Folds.
On this one, I actually have quite a few questions, so. Just in the RFD, you may, it states that you made, based on changes of legislative requirements. What legislative requirements happened for this to have to change, or? I'm just, it was that wording that kind of confused me a little bit, so.
Through the chair, I don't believe there's any legislative requirements on this one. It was just the 4-year review, and so we're updating it according to.
So basically what we're doing is we're looking at the old policy. We're taking the dollars out of it and placing that in the master rates bylaw.
Correct.
Councillor Folds.
My next question is what factors are considered in setting the annual rate?
Somebody want to take a stab at that? Because I think it's council that sets those rates with recommendations coming from operations.
Yes.
Mr. Zier.
Thank you. Through the chair, that's correct. We have stayed consistent with the rates the last number of years here. It is, the reason that this was brought out of the policy and put into the master rates bylaw was for that consideration as we go forward yearly to look at that master rates bylaw. Comparisons with other counties, that sort of thing. We haven't changed that rate right now, but we will review it at the time of the master rates bylaw review.
Thank you, Mr. Zier. Councillor Folds.
This one has to do with the acres. So what happens if the area of the lease is less than 1 acre?
Through the chair. Currently, we do not have anything less than 1 acre, but usually how it would go is the minimum payment would be 1 acre. It's right here, actually, sorry, in the policy here, with the minimum area payable as 1 acre. Chances are we're not going to rent a stockpile lease that's less than 1 acre just due to the volume that we're looking to place there, and then having equipment in there and operating in that small of an area would be awfully tight.
Councillor Folds.
How are the general land damages calculated?
Through the chair, they are currently in our, sorry, I'm trying to think of the policy. We have a land agreement policy, and they are based out through that.
Yes, Reeve King.
Whoever. So my assumption is that when we formulate a lease with somebody on a site like this, the details in terms of how we are going to deal with any off-site damage and or reclamation of the site when we leave are all laid out in those lease details. That would be my assumption. And so each site could be different depending on what the landowner is looking for.
Through the chair, yeah. They, each site is very different depending on where we're leasing, and everything's laid out through that lease agreement of all that, so.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, Councillor Cunningham.
So just further to the Reeves comments, being that they're private landowners and it's a master rates bylaw, that would just leave them no ability for negotiation within a lease, right? Like it just, I've never heard of that before where it's like a privately leased property where it's just, we're telling you what we're paying you.
I'm gonna defer that one to Mike Zier.
Thank you. So through the chair, correct, we do want to stay consistent with our lease payments on these gravel sites because we're using consistent use on them regardless of the location within the boundaries. We want to make sure that one landowner isn't treated differently than another. So we do put a consistent rate for each one of our stockpile leases, as similar to our road construction, regardless of where it is in the county. We're consistent with our payments on that.
And, yeah, go ahead, Reeve King.
I'm not wanting to cut off discussion, but I will put a motion on the floor that the Committee of the Whole recommend to Council to approve the revisions to Policy 13-6-7 and direct administration to add gravel stockpile lease rates to the master rates bylaw at its next normal update.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have a motion before us that we recommend to council to approve the revisions and to add the lease rates to the master rates bylaw. Is there any discussion to that motion? Councillor Cunningham.
Sorry, I'm just trying to get my head wrapped around it because it's a lease with a private landowner. So within that lease, which I know we're maybe not privy to that information, but would the landowner be aware then that there's no room for negotiation and that rate would be set out by the master rates bylaw? Does that make sense?
Through the chair, that is correct.
Okay.
We would go to them and explain, this is what we're offering, and go from there with them.
Okay, and I guess if they decided they weren't happy with the master rates bylaw, they would just end the lease?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Councillor Forbes.
On that. So then what would happen if Kneehill County is unable to remove the stockpile and reclaim the site within 6 months?
Through the chair, I believe we would have to pay the land damages, obviously, and pay an extended rent until we're able to remove it. Chances are, if there is a cancellation of that lease, we will most likely be able to remove it within that time, just due to the amount of product that we keep there. We would make that a priority to get it out if in that timeline.
My assumption is these are multi-year leases because it says a 4-year lease. So these leases are generally reaffirmed prior to the lease being terminated. So we have time to go ahead and to figure out if we're going to move the lease site or if we're going to determine some other method of stockpiling.
Correct.
Is there any more discussion? I see none, so I shall call the question. Does everybody knows what it's up on screen here? Okay, all those in favor? And that's carried unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Conklin. Okay, our next agenda item, 2.3, Unsightly Premises Draft Bylaw. Welcome, Ms. Grosfield.
Ms. Hazelton.
Oh, and we have Ms. Hazelton in the co-pilot seat. Anytime you are ready.
Thank you. Good morning, Council. So today we bring to you the Unsightly Premises Draft Bylaw. So this has been a few times in front of you. So on December 5th, we've brought this Unsightly Premises conversation to Council, to the Committee of the Whole, and just had some conversation around process and what we do and what our bylaw says, and then some questions about some other municipal bylaws. And then at the February 20th meeting, we brought back, again, our process and to answer those questions on those bylaws. And then today's COW meeting actually gives you a summary in a presentation of all of those bylaws being compared. And it's for some key areas. And then we've actually brought you a draft bylaw to change our current bylaw. So the breakdown of changes are provided in a table that's on page 2 of our RFD. And we can just kind of go through each of those. We're just looking for council's direction on some expectations of the bylaw and how we're going to be potentially enforcing that. So, yeah, so we can kind of go there. So the unsightly premises, so I'm not sure if you wanted to take out your bylaw to kind of look at where these sections are. So under unsightly premises, we would apply Part 4, which is general prohibited, and Part 5, which is property standards and maintenance. And again, there is a discretionary clause in there for ag practices and ag lands. What we found with the other municipal bylaws comparators is that they all have, I guess, a discretionary clause for almost anything when it comes to unsightly premises, just because it is so up to the eye of the beholder. So yes, that's there. So what is council's expectations on this part? Like, what is our goal within the residential areas, and is it the same for ag properties? And I kind of gave a couple examples there, like we talked about last time, like graffiti on buildings, or the grain bins or bags, or so what is council's expectations on that? Or do you want me to just go through the whole thing and then you guys can have a conversation?
I guess what I would like to know is currently we have an unsightly bylaw for hamlets, and that's as far as we go. So now we're looking at doing it for the balance of the county. Okay, so I don't know if this is the correct way of doing it, but is through head nods. Is there any reason that council would like to put this forward to the rest of the ag land? Because currently we don't deal with the ag land. With subdivisions or agricultural lands, we don't deal with unsightly premises there.
Right, through the chair.
We're looking at
Yeah.
possibly going in that direction?
I think that was kind of the request that came from the last council meeting. So we did a comparison, and so if you look at the chart that I did on the presentation, there's an ag comparator of those other municipalities. And so like Mountain View counties has, in determining whether a property is unsightly, an officer shall regard the normal use and location as well as agricultural identity and operations. So that's the out. So not everybody is going to be, accumulation of animal material is not considered excesses for agricultural activity. So those are the outs that they put in, but yet it gives you a tool to actually enforce on some ag properties should we deem that we should be doing that.
And that was my question. Should we deem we should be doing that?
Correct. That would be wonderful.
Personally, I don't believe that council should go in that direction. But that is my thought. What's the process, Mr. Hogan?
Through you, Mr. Chair, what we're doing here is we've heard some requests from council in terms of what you want to do with this bylaw. We've brought this here to committee of the whole so that discussion can occur, so that we can go back and draft a bylaw accordingly to bring back to a formal council meeting to update. So really the discussion here today is to provide you with some more information from our previous discussion to see where council wants to go with these things. So as committee of the whole, if you're going to recommend to council that you stick to just hamlets, we'll craft the bylaw that way. If you guys recommend that you want to go county-wide, we'll craft the bylaw that way. So that's part of what we're trying to get out today, is that and a number of other issues that are related to the discretion, or like Ms. Grossfield said, the expectations that council has around there, and hoping to have that type of discussion back and forth with council in terms of if you want to go to a direction, making sure we're clear on council's understanding, or that council or committee of the whole / council is comfortable if you're leaving some discretion in there, so that when we do get a call in, the bylaw is written as an example. If we write it where there's discretion, administratively, we're going to make a call. And so is council okay with that?
Okay, thank you. That clears up my thoughts. I just wanted to, look at you, Secretary.
Yep.
I just wanted to understand, we're gonna go through all this stuff, but regardless, it's still our decision on whether we are going to go ahead and make it county-wide, or whether we're just going to keep it currently the way it stands with hamlets.
Correct. So that if you're going to go those routes, and regardless of which route you go to what extent do you want to see that? Right now, we're doing everything on a complaints basis. So when we get a complaint, we see if it falls under the bylaw or not. You know, our understanding, I think, so far is that council's looking to maintain a complaint basis, that we're not going to go out there hunting these things. But that's a question too. So it's there's multiple questions here that we can go through, but.
Okay, but right now, we're doing a complaints basis through hamlets only.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's correct.
Reeve King.
I should say that's mostly correct. There have been the other odd one we've tried to address, but not necessarily through the unsightly premises bylaw, because it doesn't apply to those areas.
Okay. Reeve King.
So I guess there's a lot of stuff that you have in your presentation. And for myself, I kind of would like you to go through that so that I can see the whole presentation. Then I would like to have a conversation around that. Especially the material that you provide us on the enforcement side and what we might have to do in terms of trying to adjust some of these properties to be more in line. And so in your material here, you outline what our current process is. You've given us some idea of what happens in some other places as well. So I'd like to see all of that rather than try to pick one piece of this at a time, and then we can really have a wholesome conversation around, do we actually want to do more than what we currently are doing? Do we want to increase our vigilance or our process in any way? So I guess that would be my preference, and if council's okay with that. Right now, I just feel like I'm dealing with questions. I don't have enough information. Although I've read your material.
It's a lot.
I would just like the conversation to go, give you an opportunity to go through it. Yes.
So just to clarify, do you want me to go through like the PowerPoint presentation, the comparators?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
No, I understand that what we're looking at is possibly changing the way we're gonna do things.
Yes, yeah.
So let's get the information
Sure.
out there, and then we can decipher and make a decision after we get that put together in our heads.
Sounds good. Okay.
Thank you.
So the comparison of the bylaws then is attached for your review. So what I've taken is I've just taken a few key parts and compared it across 6 bylaws, existing bylaws. So that's not the bylaw that I drafted, right? Because the bylaw that I drafted took into account all of those. That is attached. So this is our existing bylaw. So in Kneehill, then, we talk about nuisance and unsightly definitions. And so nuisance, we don't have that in our existing bylaw. We do have that you can't have an excessive accumulation, and you have to keep it tidy in a hamlet only. And this includes weeds, grass, trees, construction sites. In Red Deer County, nuisance is defined as generally affecting the area, may include but not limited to, and then lists the different stuff. They actually have, it states that it excludes noise. Specifically, it actually says that in their bylaw. Mountain View, in the opinion of the designated officer, constitutes unreasonable with the others enjoying the property. Again, it's pretty gray, and then may include all of those different materials. Rocky View, in the opinion of the designated officer, constitute unreasonable, again, with others enjoying the property, and may include but not limited to that list. And Wheatland, generally affecting the area with unreasonable interference of others' enjoyment. And Lethbridge, unsightly condition, in the opinion of the enforcement officer, reference to the surrounding properties and excludes commercial, county activities, landfills, any operation or activity approved under a development permit. And so even right now, we have kind of two different processes under our existing. So if it's a development permit in the county and there's conditions on that development permit, that is something that we're going to be working with planning and enforcing. So it's not like an unsightly doesn't reach the county properties. If it's a commercial property or property that's been approved through the development process and has conditions in a development permit, it still gets enforced between the two of us. There's processes there that we can enforce those conditions. So the next page is on ag properties. So ours is the only one that we compare to that is for actually states hamlets only. Red Deer says the investigator will deem if the complaint is valid, and there's a whole process on whether or not they think it's valid. Nothing specific to farms. Mountain Views, in determining whether a property is unsightly, an officer shall regard the normal use of location as well as ag identity and operations of the property, and then accumulation of materials is not considered excesses for ag activity. Again, that's kind of through different, if it's a feedlot or something like that, that's through a different governing body. Rocky View shall regard the normal use and location. Accumulation of animal material on ag land shall not constitute as a nuisance or unsightly property. Wheatland County defines rural property as ag general, country residential, and industry, and then urban property of any other than the above, which theirs was kind of confusing as I read it. Anyway, animal material includes pens and feedlots. Determination based on neighborhood. And then Lethbridge, exemptions to unsightly properties include commercial, industrial, ag, county activities, landfills, lands that are rural ag district. So all of them have an exception point when it comes to ag, but yet it's a tool that you can still use on ag lands, is kind of, if you need it for something. Might open up the door a bit, but. So we can go through the derelict vehicle. So our derelict vehicle, it's actually in our land use bylaw that states no more than 2 vehicles and 1 RV in a tidy manner is listed in our land use bylaw. Can't have excessive accumulation and keep tidy in hamlet only is what it says on derelict vehicles in our bylaw. So it doesn't really explain too much in detail, but our land use bylaw does state that. In Red Deer, again, nuisance is defined as generally affecting the area, including accumulation of vehicles, so they actually put that under their nuisance definition, and there's no specific number. Mountain View, the derelict vehicle defined includes farm equipment, but is not contained anywhere else within the bylaw. So, as in, it's defined, but it actually doesn't explain that any further in the rest of the bylaw. So I'm a stickler for if you define it in a bylaw, you need to actually use that definition in the bylaw. So if they don't do that, then you can't really, there's no further teeth to that. In Rocky View, derelict vehicle and derelict equipment are included in an unsightly property definition based on the discretion of normal use of the area. Wheatland, in a hamlet, no more than 2 unregistered vehicles on a property and can exercise discretion based on the property. And then in Lethbridge, unsightly includes 2 or more unregistered vehicles on a property which are visible from a public property. So again, this doesn't talk to businesses, right? Because even in hamlets, if there's business, then it's a different ballgame. So, because then they're a permitted business and have development conditions.
So can I just clarify? So those limited numbers are specific to residential or ag properties or not? So like for instance in Lethbridge, 2 or more unregistered vehicles on the property, would that be like acreage residential or ag?
Yeah, it didn't define,
It didn't define.
it
what
didn't go
type,
into detail,
But
yeah.
business property would be treated differently.
Correct. If it's, yeah, if it's a permitted business, correct, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So enforcement tools within the bylaws. So number one enforcement tool is always the MGA. We have the MGA, I've included it in your RFDs as well, because those sections are very clear, but this actually kind of can take it a little bit further and describe it a little bit more in people terms so that even our public would understand what that enforcement tool is. So in Kneehill's, currently, it says may be issued a notice, may apply an extension, a violation ticket may be issued under the bylaw or a provincial ticket, and may take actions. Doesn't talk to orders very much in there. Red Deer County's order to remedy dangers and unsightly property under section 546 of the MGA. They just reference that order under the MGA. Mountain View County's, I have not changed that, sorry. We'll skip Mountain Views because I don't have that listed in there. My apologies. Rocky View County, compliance or a stop order, violation ticket, and court. So those are all defined within their bylaw. Wheatland County has a warning letter, a remedial order, a violation ticket, a violation tag, a ticket, and court. And then Lethbridge has enforcement officer may issue an order of compliance and have a violation ticket. And again, those will always, just like in all of our processes, it can still go to order. It just takes a little bit more time, and that always is kind of what our process is. It's always talk to them, written warning, right? Verbal warning, written warning. And then when you actually get into order, that is saying that they have to do something within a certain amount of time or else the next step will be taken, so. And then I did list the different fines in the bylaws. Ours is quite low compared to other people's, other municipalities. So yeah, those are just listed there. I won't go through all of them because they're fairly the same. And then you get into the order appeal process. So enforcement officer may issue a bylaw compliance notice, and orders are not part of the existing bylaw. So there's no appeal process to go through. Like, you can't appeal a warning, right, under our bylaw, unless it actually goes under the MGA. Red Deer, they have a nuisance abatement committee. So this consists of a quorum of their SDAB appointed by council. So when an order is not complied with, or if it is appealed with a fee, then it would go to a committee. Designated officer issues compliance order in Mountain View County. There is appeal with a $425 appeal fee to an unsightly property abatement committee. And so that's a council committee, and there are specific deadlines that they have to meet in order to hear that appeal, and that's written in their bylaw. Rocky View Enforcement Appeal Committee, an established council committee, 7 to 14 days they have to hear the appeal. Wheatland, request for review of remedial order by council section. So again, there's a section in there stating that the remedial orders would be reviewed by you. No specific timeline, but there is still some timeline in legal that suggests within reasonable time. And then Lethbridge, notice of appeal to county council for determination. So again, these are all through the orders. If we issued an order through planning, that would go through, would it go through SDAB? Yes. Yes. But if we issue an order, it's going to go straight, probably, like it's, yeah, it just depends which section you issue the order under. If you issue the order under the MGA, it does say that it has to go to council under the MGA. For dangerous property, I think, is the one.
The only exception to that would be if somebody had an approval through a provincial body and we issue an order, then it would go to Land and Property Rights. But typically, our orders are going to go to Subdivision Development Appeal Board.
So right now, we can kind of go through a bit of our process again, just as a reminder. So step one, we receive the complaint, and then we kind of decide whether or not it's like to act on. We do the investigation and find out if it's if there's enough factors there to action. We open a file. We might call the resident or go and talk to them directly about the concern. We'll do a verbal call or visit the property to take pictures. We might send an unsightly premises letter if we haven't done the verbal, if nothing has happened verbally. We check on the property for progress. We may issue a ticket. Again, a bylaw ticket, the municipality gets 100%, but if it's a provincial ticket, then we only get 40% of that ticket. So of a $100 ticket, that's, you know, we get 40 bucks, that's good. And then the next process that we have, so we do have a remedial order process. Should there be little action, then we would go to that remedial order, and then this goes through the MGA. We would most likely be working with planning on this as well, but if it's strictly unsightly, then we can go through the MGA, and it is appealable under the MGA, saying that it would be heard by council if there was an appeal. And then the court order would be the next process. So if council upheld that, then the court order would be the next process. And then the courts would decide if we done all of our processes reasonably. So that's kind of our process. Was there any questions on that?
Reeve King.
So this is a process question. I think it's a process question. So even if it doesn't say in our bylaw that it applies to a rural property, under the MGA and that's section 546, would it be possible for us to order to remedy damages in unsightly property under the MGA without having specific reference to a rural property in our bylaw? So if we don't reference ag property or rural properties and our bylaw still applied to hamlets, but we had a dangerous or an unsightly property in a rural environment, could we use the MGA to take some enforcement action to change what's happening on that property?
Yes, through the chair. Yes, we can use 546, section 546.
Yeah, Reeve King.
Okay, just follow up again. So that 546 does give us ability to take action regardless of what our bylaw says.
Through the chair, yes.
I just appreciate the clarification.
You bet.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay, any other questions for Ms. Grosfield or for Ms. Hazelton? Okay, so I see we have a bylaw crafted.
Yes. So this bylaw was crafted on the kind of direction feedback that we got from council last time, to compare it to some of those others and to have it across all, including ag lands. So this bylaw was drafted, and again, it can be changed. It's a draft. It doesn't even have a number, so. And so again, I kind of took those same key samples and kind of went through them and how we would apply them. Just knowing that we are on a complaint basis, and we are discretionary, so because we do know that every situation is different, but every situation is also kind of the same when it comes to a bylaw. So when there's 4 derelict vehicles, yeah, that situation might be different for one person to the other person. But we have included in ag properties in this bylaw draft. So just as awareness.
So, okay, so what we've done is we've rolled agricultural, well, the rest of the county into our hamlet policy, or hamlet unsightly premises. And we're using discretion or complaint basis the same way we would in the hamlets. And whose discretion are we using?
Yes, through the chair, it is enforcement officer or the designated officer. So a designated officer, actually, I think the only designated officer right now is it Mike? Is the only designated officer? That signs all of the orders. So any orders that there are, Mike is our designated officer right now.
I
Yes.
take it that, Mike.
Yes, that Mike. So maybe, do you want me to go through this bylaw a little bit? Maybe would that be helpful?
Oh, Counselor Cunningham.
Sorry, just to follow up on Reeve King's question. When you mentioned like with the MGA, we have that ability to, to deal with this. So we see a lot of the other municipalities, which thank you for that. That was done amazingly to both of you. Thank you for that. What is the benefit then to a municipality to including this information on bylaw than if we have that ability through the MGA 546?
Yeah, so when we put it in a bylaw, we can ticket them, number one, for that offense. And it also gives us a little bit more, I guess, more description of what we would do in those situations. So I guess that's kind of it. It just describes it a little bit more detail of, the MJA is pretty black and white. It's like, it's a dangerous property. This is what we're, so it kind of just describes it a little bit more, and it gives us a little bit more of a tool to kind of put people's complaints to a specific area. Okay. So a little bit more description, I guess.
Just to add to that, it also gives you an ability to go through that enforcement ladder, where if we're just relying on that section, it's straight to an order, where we might be able to get some compliance working with them first, verbally and with written. And so that's the other helpful piece of putting that in the bylaw.
Reeve King.
Again, clarification. So even though we don't specifically apply our bylaw to ag and other properties that aren't in our urbans, we still could use a stepped enforcement approach before we went to 546 in the MGA. So say we had a property that we felt was inappropriate and unsightly or dangerous, and it's in the ag district, we still could write letters, we still could take steps to try to remediate that before we went actually to 546, even though it's not specified in our bylaw. We don't have to necessarily go to an order. We can try to work with the property owner first.
So we can, it's just we would take out, so we would do an investigation if a complaint came in, right? Again, if a complaint came in, we would do an investigation, we can still do that. As part of that investigation, though, there's no bylaw that would be enforceable through that. We would still have a conversation with that person, and we would just hope that they would just comply, right? Because we don't have the steps in the bylaw to go through, because they're not infraction of a bylaw. So you won't have the ticketing, but yes, you can still have a conversation with them, and and those ag properties have complied from our experience for the most part. Some of those little complaints that we've had, they have complied, and it's been fine. So then we don't have the bylaw step of ticketing them, so we move right to the order, right? Because we have no violation to ticket them for. So we just move straight to the order. So we would still do a warning, but we still can't. We don't have a bylaw to actually say, you're going to get a ticket for this if you don't do this.
No, and I guess the reason I'm asking the question is that we don't have to go direct to an order in order to try to remediate something that we see as a problem out there. Even though it's not in our bylaw, we can still have those conversations. We can still approach landowners in a reasonable manner to say, we have received a complaint. This is a problem. we're asking you to remediate the situation and try to be reasonable first. If there is no response, I recognize that we then can't just go, okay, well, we're going to give you a ticket. But
Yep.
we can give you an order under the MGA that actually probably has more legs than the ticket does to try to get that property adjusted. Am I incorrect?
Yes,
with
that, no, that is correct. Yep.
So I guess what I'm trying to get sorted in my mind is whether we need to add ag properties into our bylaw or non-hamlet properties into our bylaw, and whether there's a real benefit to us doing that. And then the other question comes back in my mind is, we know we have properties in our hamlets, in our urbans, that are unsightly and that are less than community standard. What are we doing to deal with those if nobody actually complains about them? The answer would be nothing, right? And so unless we get a complaint that drives our process, those properties will remain as they are for whatever period of time, until we get a complaint.
And right now, that is the direction of council, yes.
Okay.
Like it is on complaint basis right now,
So
yes.
then the next question I would ask is, if we actually have to go to the ticketing side of our enforcement process within those properties, what's our success level and how much time is involved in that process?
We haven't ticketed too many people because there are some, yeah, we haven't ticketed too many people. We have ticketed, not for unsightly premises, we have ticketed for more animal control stuff than unsightly.
Follow up?
Yeah, go ahead.
So again, I guess I'm just trying to chase this process through. So if we're not ticketing or not really chasing the unsightly premise side of things, does that mean we're not getting complaints on that, or we just are being very effective in the approach that we take prior to a ticketing side or enforcement side?
From my perspective, we don't get a lot of complaints. Some of the complaints that we do have are not, I guess I could say some of the properties are untouchable due to some of the properties are under a different jurisdiction than what we can approach. So there might be some files that are under our CMP jurisdiction and we can't approach those properties. So those are some of the ones that we get quite a few complaints about, but we can't actually action them, unfortunately, just because they are under our CMP jurisdiction. So until they move off of that list, we can't action those complaints. So that one's a little bit tricky.
Councilor Christie.
So on those sites that are unapproachable, that complaint could be forwarded to the RCMP then? So they know what's going on behind the scenes?
Yes, yes. We would, as part of our investigation, we would look that property up, do a drive-by, take some photos, do an investigation when we get that complaint, and then we actually do see if it's like a flagged property with RCMP.
But the information we would have would be passed on to the RCMP?
Yeah, yeah, we would make that contact with the RCMP about that file.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I'm trying to figure out where RCMP would have jurisdiction. If there's something illegal going on that property?
Correct. If there's surveillance of that property.
Oh, surveillance, okay,
Yeah,
go ahead.
so I can, through you, Mr. Chair, I can give you an example from my past. In another municipality that I worked at, we had an auto wrecker's yard that was very unsightly. We were asked by the RCMP not to do anything with it because they were actively surveilling it for drug use and drug trafficking and stuff like that. So on a couple of fronts, we did not want to interfere with and jeopardize their investigation. Because a site like that, if the RCMP is going after them for, say, narcotics, you don't want to try and go after them for unsightly. They'll pay that fine and just keep going. Where if the RCMP get them, then it's a different thing, right?
Yeah, so it doesn't necessarily have to be narcotics, it could be stolen vehicles.
Exactly.
Pot, yeah, chop shop.
So you're into those realms. So we don't want to, I guess in some of those, technically, could we issue an unsightly? We could. We're not gonna do that if it jeopardizes an RCMP, like an ongoing investigation. Likewise, if we know stuff like that is going on, this past site, there was a guy floating around the area that was a known former hitman for the HA. You're not gonna send our staff into that site. So that's another area where if we figure that there's a safety issue in there, we are not going to touch it. We're not sending officers into an environment, if they're running a chop shop or they've got narcotics going on, we're not sending our peace officers or any of our staff into that. So there's also a question of, it's simply unsafe for us to do so, we're not gonna do it.
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Gannon.
Thank you, through the chair. I just want to add one item is that when these properties are flagged, that information is strictly confidential and held in trust. So when we handle those files, we want council to understand that it may represent as if we're not doing anything about it, but the team has a very limited capacity of what they can do. So we won't be advertising to the customer, to the complainant, that this property is under investigation and we can't do anything. It's just we capture the information and we move forward with the file as we can.
Okay, well, thank you for that information. I was under the assumption that it had to do with illegal activities and we're keeping our nose out of it. Okay. Reeve King.
Coming back to the properties we can actually do something on. In our process, how often would you estimate, do we get to the point where we have somebody who's unreasonable and unwilling to do what's being requested, and then we have to go to the enforcement side? So is our process where we're approaching people in a reasonable manner, getting us the results that we need or want, and as a result, we're really not having to go to the enforcement side very often? That's the first question. And then the question would be is if we do go to the enforcement side and the ticketing, how complex and how involved does that get as far as court and all those other things that have to happen? So first, is our enforcement process relatively effective and so we don't have to go to the ticketing side? And then if we get there, then what's the process? And how effective is that?
I'm going to answer from our side, from planning, first of all. So typically for us, when we're dealing with sites, it's often unauthorized construction. And so we're usually going and making them aware that they do need permits and those types of things. Very rarely have we had to go to enforcement. We will work with them to try to get them through the process. However, we have had a couple where we have wound up in court. Very costly, very time consuming, and it took like 2 years. Part of it, they're the ones that went to court because they appealed the stop order that was given to them. They were unsuccessful in the appeal, so then they took it on to the courts, and so we wound up in the court system for that, and they were unsuccessful in that court. But it does take a lot of time on staff's part because you never know when you're going to have to facilitate or provide information for parts of these processes, and the time frame to get something through courts is incredibly long. So both of the ones that we've dealt with in the courts were 2 years at least. We're dealing with one right now that's gone back to appeal that will have been probably 4 years by the time we're all said and through. So, and this one is not our appeal, but it's a challenge because we're involved in all of these when they land in our municipality. So it does create a lot of time and effort. The other thing I wanted to mention too is there are fines that we can, through land use bylaw, they have to be done by an enforcement officer. So we can penalize somebody if they have not applied for a permit. We can charge them double the permit, and then that increases if they do it again. Then we have escalating fines in those cases. So we do have some of that ability under the land use as well. Again, usually people have been good. They might be mad about it, but they realize that they do need to do some of those things. And so we have not had to go to that route very often. But so anyway, that's just more from my.
And then from the enforcement side and enforcing the unsightly premises bylaw right now, I believe I had some stats in one of the past RFDs, and I think that we had like almost 70 files between unsightly over the past 10 years, and none of them have really, they might have come to a couple tickets, but none of them have gone through the court process. We have had one file, for sure, that I know of, that has been in an ag district. And it was brought to council, and council said, don't do anything with that property. So that was something that we brought to you because some of those files will be very costly to go to the court order process. And I did talk to a couple people from a couple of other municipalities, and they did say you're looking at possibly like $75,000 to $100,000 to clean up some of these properties. Because there are definitely, you have to store the materials for a certain amount of time, and it is definitely, and then of course legal fees, so that's not, and then we wouldn't actually probably have our own staff go onto that property. We would likely hire out that to come in because there's professionals that do that, so. Does that answer your question? I know that it's not, I don't have the stats in front of me, but we really haven't issued a ticket for Unsightly for many, many years.
No, that's what I was looking for, just a clarification on the process. And I know I've sat here when we've talked about some of those kind of things previously, but it's just in terms of looking at doing an adjustment on something like this, it's really valuable to have all the information that we need in order to maybe consider whether we want to change that or not. So that is appreciated. Thank you.
Okay, I think one of your questions earlier on is, do we want you to go through the bylaw? What does council wish to do with that? Do you want Ms. Grosfield to go through the bylaw, or do we have questions about the bylaw? I know I've read it. I don't necessarily believe somebody needs to read it to me, but it's up to council. Is there sections in there that council has questions on? Or the committee, sorry.
I could go through the bylaw and just, like, I had unsightly premises, for example, it says apply part 4, so we could kind of like go through that process and kind of just show you where we would apply that if we got a complaint in.
Okay, sure. You can
Is that something?
expound upon the bylaw.
Okay. So right off the bat, I kind of just want to show you that we do have a definition in here for agricultural practices. It means that are conducted in a manner consistent and appropriate and accepted customs and standards as established and followed by similar agricultural operations under similar circumstances and lands. So we do have agriculture listed in there. The other one that was a bit flagged was reasonable state of repair in the definitions. So that means building constructions that are structurally sound, free from damage. So this safe for intended use and so as not to present as an unsightly premises. And so that one was a little bit of a an add, I guess. So when we get to unsightly premises, we're going to apply part 4, which is general prohibited. So an owner shall cause or, an owner shall not cause or allow their property to become unsightly or dangerous. And then it talks about accumulation of building material. Where a valid permit exists shall not constitute as an unsightly premises bylaw or unsightly property. So again, that's talking more to the development. That points it more to the development side. In the opinion of the designated officer, the work is currently in progress, not excessive, or all reasonable steps are minimizing the unsightly to the property. So again, that's more permitted. The accumulation of animal material on a property designated or permitted for use as agricultural land shall not constitute an unsightly property under this bylaw, so as long as, in the opinion of the designated officer, the accumulation is not considered excessive, given the scope and scale of the activity. And so then under Part 5, we might go through what is a reasonable state of repair, as the definition goes through. It talks about the accumulation of materials, and then whatever every owner shall ensure to do. So those are the two sections that we would reflect when we went to the unsightly premises bylaw. Or if we got an unsightly premises complaint, sorry. So we would go through those two sections and whether or not they meet where that would come in. So if it's a commercial property that has a permit, that would go to Barb to enforce. If it's an unsightly on a residential property, we would enforce it under the Part 5. Residential or ag, but like I said, the key is that the ag properties do have an out, but yet we can still enforce through the bylaw should we need to. So permitted use complaints. So again, that's applying Part 3.7. Any operation or activity operating under a valid county development approval condition is exempt from this bylaw. That makes it fairly clear that way. Vehicle and equipment, apply Part 6. So Part 6 is vehicle and equipment. No owner of a property shall allow the exterior storage of or parking of derelict motor vehicles more than 14 consecutive days in a residential district where the land is used primarily for residential purposes as defined in the LUB, land use bylaw. No owner of the property shall allow more than one RV or more than 2 motor vehicles in a residential area where they shall be kept in a manner that does not become unsightly. Again, it's in the opinion of the enforcement officer. And 17, notwithstanding the foregoing, the storage of any number of unregistered vehicles or inoperable motor vehicles on a parcel which are part of a permitted ag practice, district lands or commercial use as defined by the LUB are permissible unless, in the opinion of the enforcement officer or a designated officer, the accumulation on the property becomes unsightly or affects the amenities of the area. So we've written everything in gray, as you can see.
Reeve King.
Oh, yep.
Sorry to keep pestering you, but all of us sitting at this table here can probably think of 3 or 4 or more properties that are in ag district or might have been rezoned into commercial or some other usage, where all of a sudden you see accumulation of unregistered derelict vehicles, or you see accumulation of other objects that are objectionable, and that accumulation becomes massive over time. We can also think of other properties that are in ag district that have gone downhill very, very badly, and very unfortunate circumstances apply in a lot of those cases. And so we sit here and we struggle with those kind of properties, and what do you do about them? And so that's what we're trying to balance here is, and yet at the same time, I know when I drive through our hamlets that there are properties in those hamlets that are what I would define as very unsightly, and yet it's deemed in the opinion of X that it is or it isn't. And so when you get into those vague areas, like you say, the gray, it becomes very hard to define, should we go after or not go after? Should we do something or not do something? Should we just pretend it doesn't exist? And then usually what ends up happening is that condition just gets worse and worse and worse and worse. And then when we get to the enforcement side, we start to talk thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to try to remediate some of those properties, especially if you start to go county-driven cleanup on those properties. But they are dangerous, they are unsightly, they are an absolute blight on the landscape, and yet they're still there. And yeah, you bring them to us and you say, well, it could be, you know, $50,000 to $100,000, and we go, ooh. So that's, to me, that's the situation that we're in, and to try to deal with that becomes very, very difficult. And certainly, you sit there on the enforcement side, and Ms. Hazelton too, trying to keep things sort of within limits. So I don't know. I'd sure like to hear from the rest of council as far as where what their thinking is and how they're feeling about some of this stuff.
Go ahead, Councillor Penner.
It's a tough one when it comes to ag. And there are some out there, like some of this derelict equipment is kept for a reason. My question would be, for sure you need to have, this is like the backbone for you, if a complaint comes forward, if the setbacks aren't met, like the machinery or whatever, the derelict stuff is too close to the roads, and does this help you at all in that way, or is that a transportation thing that could be dealt with without having this ag in this bylaw, you know, with this derelict equipment?
I would say if it's impeding sight distance, if it's close to an intersection, for example, and it's impeding sight distance, then that's a safety issue. And I do think it could be dealt with somehow through the transportation side, or us just saying that needs to get moved back. But we're not always aware of that issue unless somebody brings that to our attention as well.
Reeve King.
There are some things I'd like to chat about, but I don't want to chat about in a public forum. So I'm wondering if we could have a closed session where we could talk about specifics and maybe deal with some of those. I don't know if council feels that that's necessary, but there are some things that I think we could talk about more freely if we weren't in this forum of an open session. So I'm looking if council would be amenable to that, I would make a motion that we consider closed session, probably section 16, which would be harmful to third-party business.
Okay, so I take it you're making a motion for us to go into closed session, and we will determine whether or not we want to go in closed session by having a vote.
Yeah, I guess my feeling is I feel very limited in my ability to have this conversation in this particular forum.
Mr. Hogan.
Through Mr. Chair, if I'm understanding correctly, Reeve King, you're looking at maybe continuing the discussion by being able to cite specific instances or files within the county.
Specific properties.
Okay. So under that, I agree that would be a closed session item, and we'd probably recommend section 17, which is personal privacy.
Okay, so from what I can tell, Reeve King, you've made a motion to move us into closed session under section 17, personal privacy.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So moved.
So we have a motion to go into closed session. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Councillor Had a motion to come out of closed session at 10:29, galleries refilled, and bringing it back into open session at 10:31. Okay. Councilor McGee.
As we consider making any changes, like maybe this bylaw, we also have to be very conscientious of what our resources that would it take. Do we have the staff capacity? Do we have the budget for it? And how do you see that affecting your team?
If we do get an increase with this bylaw in complaints, we would, right now, our capacity is quite limited. We do have a level of service that we are on complaint basis only. If you wanted us to do proactive, or if we do see an increase in the complaints, we would probably be short capacity as of right now, just because we only have 2 working peace officers at this time, so. And so I guess kind of going back to the different, council kind of has a couple of I have provided you a draft copy of a bylaw that includes egg properties, discretionary on egg properties. I can also update our existing unsightly premises bylaw with a few more wording changes, if that's so what you choose, and then I can bring back that one as well. That does not include egg properties, but would only be for hamlets. And so those are kind of like, that's kind of what I need to know from you, direction-wise, of where you want to go with this bylaw.
Comments, questions, concerns? Just one question. If we bring in ag into this bylaw, does that somehow put us at greater liability than if we leave it out? The county itself. If ag becomes part of a bylaw, how is our liability affected? Mr. Hogan?
Through Mr. Chair, that, I don't know that there would be a lot of impact, but that would maybe be a good question to pose to legal if there was anything in that, that obligated us to do, or that it didn't. You know, a lot of times that might come down to negligence, which I don't know that would really tie into a lot of this area, but I guess the short version is I'm not sure that there would be a huge impact, but that would be a better question for legal.
Thank you for that. So where are we going with this? Yes, Reeve King.
So really, other than referring to agricultural practices, and there was one other place, general guidelines, part 3. When deciding as to whether a property is unsightly in this bylaw, the enforcement officer and designated officer consideration shall include the normal use and location, as well as the agricultural practices or land use, permitted agriculture, commercial of the property. So beyond that, and the definition of agricultural practices, the bylaw as you presented it today does not extend jurisdiction into ag, really, does it?
It does, it just becomes discretionary.
Okay.
It just becomes a discretionary, up to the ag enforcement officer or designated officer.
Yeah.
So yes, you take those into consideration, but you still can enforce through the bylaw, using the bylaw.
guess the way it's written, I don't have a big problem with it. Because of the level of discretion that's involved. And again, because our process is complaint-driven, and the way we have enforced in the past has been by working with people and getting good results. I don't know that the change in the wording really would impact the way we are doing business currently.
So is that a motion?
Well, I just want to say, I guess through the review, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead,
we just-
Councillor Penner.
Not through the review, sorry, through the chair. Just gonna be very careful here with the word, make sure we're very clear and understanding that I have a heritage building on my farm, and it starts to fall down, but it's my private property. Can I be told to tear it down if somebody complains? Like, how many complaints, what's the whole, I just want to be very, very clear here.
Councillor Cunningham.
Totally 100% get what you're saying, Councillor Penner. I think some of the difference sometimes lies from what I'm hearing from people is a lot of these properties are abandoned. And so there's nobody living there. With the property like you mentioned of yours, you folks are there, right? So you're going to be monitoring who's coming on your property, right? But
Not always, sorry, they're
Not
at
always? That one
different
isn't?
land locations, not
Okay.
right where I live, but I mean, it's at
Okay,
different, you know.
okay.
But
Yeah.
keep going, that's fine. But,
Nope.
you know, like, I mean, as your farms get bigger, we absorb other locations and, you know, you inherit them, whatever the word might be, like.
No, and like I said, there's, you know, there is so many of these unique properties that, you know, people use for photo ops or whatever, so I 100% agree, it's a slippery slope, but there is some of them that I do hear from that are abandoned, right? And so there is nobody watching it, there's nobody monitoring who's coming on or off the property, but yeah, it's very tricky.
Well, the tricky part isn't that tricky. It is private property. Somebody is paying taxes on it.
I guess tell the criminals that are using it for illegal activity that, I guess if they.
Well, so now okay, I'm not going there. I am not going there. Reeve King.
So it's unfortunate that the world in which we live has changed so much that people no longer respect private property or the rights of other people. For many, many years, you could have that abandoned farm building, and other than a few high school kids having the occasional weekend party in them and possibly burning them down around themselves while they were partying, they weren't really a big problem. And as far as I'm concerned, they still aren't a huge problem. And if council feels that any agricultural language in this bylaw is problematic, I certainly am not saying that we need to make the change. I'm just saying with the wording as is and with the level of discretion that's involved, I'm okay with it. So if council as a whole feels that that's not a direction that we want to go, then I totally would support that as well. So if we want to leave the language that doesn't include ag side, then I'm okay with that. And then we have to look at, and that's why I asked the question earlier about the MGA and 546 and 545, which gives us powers to deal with some of these properties if it's deemed necessary under whatever discretion we're going to use. So, and no, I did not make the motion.
Mr. Hogan.
Through you, Mr. Chair, there's, as Reeve King just outlined, there is an option that you have to remove the wording as it applies to ag and go the other process. That does mean in some instances that you may be hitting something, you know, something that requires some finite maneuvering. You might be hitting with a hammer in the odd occasion. You do have options, and this is why we're here today, to say, are there other ways that you want to craft the bylaw? So that the purpose is not saying that this is the exact bylaw that's going to come to you as council. And we don't even need to figure out necessarily the wording today, but if what we're hearing in the conversation is that council wants some tool to deal with, let's call it unsightly or nuisances, say material blowing off site, stuff like that. we can figure out wordings in the bylaw to propose back to you. So it would be things like, I don't know if I'd define them as heritage buildings, that might have a different connotation, but we'd figure out the wording, right? Your old granaries, your old farmhouses, et cetera, will generally not be considered unsightly premises. Like, we can put some of that into the wording there, right? To say we're not gonna do this. We'd probably get legal to wrangle some wording there for us, because we do still want the ability to deal with ones that, where you do have, say, criminal activity going on, or you do have some of that, right? And that's where you'd go into that wording of, you know, we're generally not going to consider that to be an issue unless there's some of this other stuff going on, right? Which is where the discretion comes in. So we can go back and we can play with that wording and bring something back to you if that's the will of council. So you can remove it, you can alter it, you can keep it. You've got all those options. We're just looking for your direction as to which of those you want us to pursue. And like I said, it means that we'll, you know, we'll change the bylaw, and we'll put it back in front of you for your consideration, and you can say, yeah, that's what we want, or, you know what, we need more changes. That's part of the process.
Councilor Penner.
Like, as landowner, it's frustrating when people enter our buildings, you know, and it's private property. It is so frustrating, and you do everything you can to make sure it's locked and you name it. So, it's just, and like, I do like the word, like, a dangerous property means, you know, any condition of a property which in the opinion of a designated officer may create or constitute a danger to public safety. The wording is in there, but just how we deal with it, I gotta make sure I'm very clear before I agree with anything on how, because there are properties that are hit and people, they don't care. Even the landlord doesn't care about it. So we need to be able to deal with those properties. But there are some of us that care about some of these locations and try very hard. So I'm in favor of having something come back to us.
So was that a motion? Okay, go ahead.
I just wanted to, there's one other thing that typically with any enforcement policy, there is usually some clause that talks about vexatious or frivolous complaints and the ability for us over time when that comes up and you get these multiple complaints that really aren't validated, that we have the ability to ignore some of those things. So typically, I was just mentioning to Deb, I do think we should have something in there that gives us that ability, because that's very typical in enforcement.
And then, sorry, I just want to clarify, so just so that I heard you correctly, I'm going to put something in about garbage blowing around and research that a little bit, just to make sure, even on ag properties if possible. I'm going to leave in the ag part, but I am going to see, I might just take out the reasonable state of repair in there, because it does say structurally sound in there. So, I mean, that would take out a lot of farm buildings. It would apply to a lot of farm buildings, but not apply because of the discretion, but it could apply. So I will remove that out of there, blowing garbage, and then if we add the heritage buildings or some kind of wording, but some kind of wording, I kind of just put it in quotes, homesteads, okay, and see how we can define that a little bit better. And then the complaints, which we might have in our bylaw enforcement bylaw, but we can see if we can put that in there. And then the only nuisance then that we're going to be talking about in here is the garbage blowing, correct? Because we have in the past talked about different nuisances, such as like lights shining in each other's houses and water runoff and smoke and odors and noise. And so this bylaw doesn't talk to any of that. So I just wanted you guys to know that some of their other bylaws do talk to those other nuisances. And we're only doing the garbage. I just wanted to clarify that. Okay.
Okay. There is kind of sort of a motion there. So what are council's,
So I can read my
Councillor
motion if
Bennett?
you like. I can read my motion if you like.
okay, I didn't see a name to it, so that's why I said a motion.
That the committee of the whole requests further changes to the proposed unsightly premises bylaw for consideration at a future committee of the whole meeting.
Okay. Thank you very much. Yes, it is coming, yes. Any discussion? Councillor McGee?
I just wanted to bring back the conversation around fines as well. Do we need that as part of this motion, or is that a second topic? Because in my opinion, we need to increase them.
Oh, the fines, oh, okay.
Councillor Penner?
That could be part of my motion here, so we can continue the discussion here. I've just put the motion forward, so can that discussion still happen? That's gonna be, so that you're in the understanding, or administration's the understanding that we would like you to visit that too? So if you want to discuss it.
That'd be perfect. So I would like to discuss the idea of increasing the fines. I prefer red deers, but at minimum, I want to see the wetland level.
So do we need the, okay, we have the understanding that the fines will be part of it. We need a motion to up the fines, no? Okay.
Through Mr. Chair. Yeah, I don't think we need a specific motion for that.
Okay.
Really today is, we've got a few things that you're saying, hey, we'd like to see what the bylaw looks like if we do this. We've got one of those as increasing the fines, so when we bring that back to the next, when we bring that back for its next review, then we'll have that built in. And you can see what it looks like,
And we can have that discussion at the next review.
yeah.
I was hoping you'd say that.
But if that's the general consensus of the committee of the whole, is that you'd like to see that, which I think it was, I saw most heads nodding, so if that's the general consensus, we'll note that down to tie that in.
Councillor Penner?
Just a question. Is this going to take quite a bit of work, Deb, to put together, or be something we revisit really quickly here while it's fresh on our minds?
If I can fit it into the schedule that needs to be fit in, could probably, I'm not sure when your next committee of the whole meeting is. Okay. I'm fine with it. It just depends on what you guys can, for deadlines.
Okay, we can bring that back for June.
Okay, is there any more discussion to the motion? Seems not. We have a motion before us that the committee of the whole request further changes to the proposed unsightly premises bylaw for consideration at a future committee of the whole meeting. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Does that bring us to the end of our agenda? We don't have anything in closed session. Okay. All right, well, I guess we stand adjourned at 10:50 a.m. Thank you.